Today, members of the LGBTQIA community are familiar with many different gender identities. Some folks may identify as transgender, non-binary, genderqueer, agender, gender non-conforming, the list goes on. However, many of these terms we use now have only been around for a few decades, while gender-expansive identities have been around for much longer. Non-Western cultures had developed and understood meanings of gender prior to colonization, eradicating much of these social structures and enforcing a Western Christian gender binary on much of the world. Even without the Western binary affecting them, many non-Western societies held beliefs about gender that operated on a binary system. Third genders and non-binary identities typically existed somewhere in between masculine and feminine, and rarely outside of this two-ended spectrum. Now, before we look at some of these identities, we would like to apologize for mispronouncing any of the terms, as we don't speak the languages of the countries we're looking at, so we'll try our best. A surprising majority of multicultural non-binary identities have been expressed by biologically male individuals whose gender resides somewhere on the feminine side of the spectrum. This pattern is particularly evident in Asian cultures. In Myanmar, some males are observed to express cross-gender behavior and are known as occults. Occults assume the dress and social role of women and are respected as shamans and seers, as their femininity is believed to be bestowed by a god. Warrior refers to a third gender in Indonesia. Warriors are assigned male at birth, but may identify anywhere along the gender spectrum. Members of this third gender may even choose to pass as female in their daily life. In the Philippines, the Tagalog term bakla can refer to many different gender and sexual identities, but has generally commonly referred to biological males who assume the social roles and mannerisms attributed to women. The term bakla has existed for centuries, but with westernization, it has become more conservative and is typically used to refer to a gay man, rather than a person not conforming to gender norms. In South Asia, particularly in India, Hijra refers to a distinct third gender, typically referring to biological males who identify as Hijra and adopt feminine gender roles. Colonization has marginalized Hijras and forced many of them into sex work. The Hijra identity is a strong example of identities that resemble what we would call transgender, but culturally are regarded as an entirely separate gender, rather than a male individual transitioning to a woman or otherwise. Indigenous peoples of the Americas tend to have more variant concepts of gender. One widely known example is the Native American gender identity known as Two-Spirits. Two-spirited folks in Native American culture have been regarded as healers whose expression of both genders is an indication of two spirits living within one person. The Navajos have two different words for two-spirited folks, one for biologically male individuals and another for biological females. Again, this diverges from modern labels for non-binary gender identities, which typically refrain from emphasizing the sex and gender assigned at birth. Native Hawaiian culture recognized people whose gender roles fell anywhere between masculine and feminine as mahu. In some South American cultures, travestis are people assigned male at birth whose gender identity is more feminine. Travestis are considered to be a third gender by some, and travestis do not always see themselves as female. They sometimes use hormones and varying degrees of surgical modification to make their bodies more feminine. Mujer in Zapotec civilization in indigenous Mexico were males who dressed as women and took on feminine social roles. Today, the term mujer has evolved to often refer to gay men. We may see many of these multicultural identities as transgender, gender fluid, or other identities that we've labeled within the Western queer community, but we do not always have the correct terminology to describe identities from different cultures. These other roles and identities do not follow the same thinking and practices as those that exist in Western society. Some concepts are unique to people and simply untranslatable from their language. In order to get a closer look at the effects of culture and westernization on concepts of gender and the identities of different people, we asked a few trans and non-binary folks to share how their gender identities are influenced by their cultures.
Hi, I'm Kiana. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as non-binary. And thinking about gender and culture, I was thinking about how, one of the ways I feel that my gender is most policed is in the context of, having to represent Iranian culture in America, the way my mom often, describes why I should, invest in very, gendered forms of, hygiene and things like that is by saying, oh, well, Middle Eastern women have to do this, because Iranian women are very hairy and have unibrows, and that's not how American women look. You have to change this, and this about your appearance to conform to that. So thinking about like the ways in which like specifically like being part of like an immigrant community impacts the way you're able to express your gender is something I've been thinking about.
All right, I'm Jade, they, them. I am genderqueer. So the only real culture I have is my mom is half Brazilian, and it's like the white Brazilian. So like even that, very little. But unless you count my chicken farming culture in Michigan, Brazil is like surprisingly accepting of like trans women models, but then like also extremely violent to trans folks who don't like pass. So as someone who is trying to like kind of exist between like this like between different ideas of gender and like different concepts of gender, that is always a question of concern for me. Like if I were to go back to Brazil, I mean, I think my queerness in general will always be under attack regardless of where I am, just because there are some really hateful folks out there. But ultimately, I'm going to keep being queer, and I'm going to keep being genderqueer, and I'm going to look cool, and every pore of my body is gay, and every bit of my blood is gay, so you can't really stop that. I'm unstoppable.
Hello, I'm Jack. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I identify as a trans guy, and I am a first-year Filipino American. So for me, being queer is really interesting because I am the token queer in my family. Nobody else in my family, at least if they're not closeted, they're all older than me, so I have no idea. But I'm basically the only person who came out as queer in my family, and it's a pretty big family. For me, culture is very important. We're all family oriented, and being sort of the first line of, I guess, Americans from my family of immigrants, it's very weird because they're very religious. I'm also religious, but it's a really difficult line that the value of family is so deeply rooted with my culture that my cousins are all rallying with me against all of the transphobia and stuff that goes on in the culture. So they're always trying to back me up, even if it might be difficult for them to understand all of the terminology or all of the political correctness, if you want to put it that way. Aunts and uncles have been half and half. They're kind of okay with it. My parents are very split. My mom's working with it. My dad's pretty awful with it, but he's trying. So that's about like all I can ask for them, knowing their personalities. And I find it really important that for me, my family accepts me, and I'm hoping that they do that. So for me, the only problems that I have is just trying to work through all of those problems, even though that I'm sure that they'll accept me in their own way. And yeah, go Warriors.